Hey everybody, welcome to the Hackle Box here on this lovely June Friday. Hope you all have had a great week and joined as always by the wonderful Eric Hansen. Eric, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good.
Good, good. And then the always wonderful Pinky, who we can't see, but I think we've still got him. Pinky, how you doing, man?
Yeah, doing good, doing good.
Good, good. So today we would just like to remind everybody we don't really have many topics, or we have one topic to talk about. We're going to do Q&As. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and start throwing those in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to all those as the show goes on. Hopefully we get some questions today. Otherwise, this might be a pretty short show, but we'll see. Uh, Top of the agenda today is CISA recently announced some more budget cuts. I think it's the second iteration of budget cuts to the organization. In this round, well, I think total, after the two rounds of budget cuts, we've seen about 1,000 staffers who's lost their positions, either through buyouts, early retirements, or layoffs. I think their original, what I was looking at before, I was trying to find how many full-time employees does CISA have. And based upon the 2025 budget statistics, it looks like about 3,600 total employees are there. Their total annual budget is $3 billion, and holy crap, that's a lot of money. And so this total cut rounds out to be about $54.7 million cut to the CISA budget. It results in about an 18% reduction in funding, a 27% staff cut. So pretty significant movement over there. And really would just like to have an open conversation with you guys about that. What's your feeling on this, Eric? What kind of impact do you foresee from these budget cuts?
I mean, you said the reduction was what, 54 million, is that what you said?
$54.7 million cut in their funding out of a
Yeah.
total of $3 billion. So
Yeah,
about
that's a
18%. Yeah.
yeah. 18%, obviously smaller than the actual staff cut, right? And things like that. I mean, I
Mhm.
think in general the cuts, I don't know. I don't know how I feel or what I think about it, honestly, at this point. I do think that CISA, in my opinion, it produces some, good services, good work, good help. Like it's a useful and needed organization, in my opinion. At the same time, I wasn't super surprised to see it get focused on for some cuts because of the nature of how the organization kind of does work with a lot of things that maybe don't necessarily have impact on the government, right? I
Mhm.
think that like it makes sense when you have a government organization or whatever to kind of work on the security of the government, the government's vendors, and things like that, people that are working with that. I think that there's probably been a decent amount of those resources going to other things, and I'm not surprised to see that get looked at. That
Yep.
said, I am concerned. You know what I mean? Like I know that a
Sure.
lot of these cuts, a lot of these positions are necessary positions. The impact that it has on their ability to do the things they've been doing is likely to be, I think, decently large, and I think we're going to see a reduction in their ability to operate in the way they were. What that overall means, though, for long term, I don't know. Like
Sure.
if they are reducing maybe the scope of the people they're working with, but at the same time producing the same level of work quality and benefiting the people that need it, then it might be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. From my perspective, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And really we're just gonna have to let this play out to see what the impact is. I think, like you said, they do a lot of good stuff. I try to pull some stats about this before the show today, but obviously they have their cyber hygiene program, which is super helpful. I think there's about 8,000 organizations nationally that take part of that. They do about 700 assessments annually. They focus on election security assessments as well. They do vulnerability scanning, which I think a lot of our clients are familiar with and utilize that service. They've published a security by design guide to try to help people navigate the very confusing space of purchasing software. They've started another initiative too. That's software manufacturers who commit to the Secure by Design guide. They've got about 250 software manufacturers so far that have said, "Yeah, we'll take the pledge," and try to implement security as a mindset when developing products. They put out good AI guidance. They have some incident reporting, education programs. A tool I talk about a lot, which I think is super valuable, is the KEV, the Known Exploitable Vulnerabilities Catalog. I think that is a very valuable tool that they're utilizing today. But I don't know how all those are going to be affected. The only thing I know that is for sure going to be affected, and this kind of makes me think about maybe why the funding cut happened, but Some specifics I was able to find is that the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center is going to be impacted by this. They're essentially eliminating that program. And I think they're also ending the voluntary program to share information about cyber defenses to local election officials. So it seems pretty pinpointed and targeted to roll back those elections services that CISA is currently doing. I haven't seen anything that says the other services are going to roll back. I don't know if that's true or not. I think we'll, like you said, just have to wait and see how this plays out. But yeah, it does seem like a significant number. I don't know if it's going to have any direct impact to us. From what I see, the KV is still running. Like you and I were talking about before, there was some in another initiative, some funding rollbacks for CVE, but those budget cuts were reinstated. And so that's good news for everyone here. I think we all rely on CVE in some form or fashion of our work. But I think we're going to have to wait and see what the true impact is to us and all the organizations that we support. Pinky, you still with us?
Yeah. And I was gonna say, I mean, at least as far as the stuff we see, we're still seeing clients being notified by CISA, DHS, around attacks that they're involved in, that kind of thing, right? So we've still been seeing that happening. Actually, one recently was super fast. I mean, within hours of the initial attack. So that at least seems to still be cranking along. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be burnout or whatever with reduced staff, and that may take a hit later on. But as of now, it still seems like that's still working the way we've seen in the past. Honestly, I mean, the couple of hours one is the fastest I've ever seen them do anything. Not disparaging them at all, but usually you've got a pretty significant delay in the time between when they're able to observe an attack or at least when they hear about an attack and then reach out. So um, which is understandable. I mean, they've got to verify things and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it still seems to be cruising along as far as I can tell.
Yeah, so you said that notification was within hours of their discovery. They engaged the client.
Yeah, it was within. I mean, I don't know the exact number, like a couple hours, maybe a few more than that, but it's definitely same day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super impressive. And so to me, that's promising. So maybe they are refocusing. And like honestly, and I'm not never going to get political here, but I'll look at that $3 billion budget, and our owner Evan has done a focused talk analyzing that budget as well. And from my perspective, like, is there potential there was bloat in that budget? Absolutely. It's a government agency. There's quite often going to be bloat in those agencies. I can't say for sure. But I'm hopeful that this was an exercise where they just identified the bloat and they're still going to remain functional and not have negative impact to the people who really rely on the data and the resources they provide to everyone. I will say too, I did find the executive director of CISA, Bridget Bean, put out a statement saying essentially like we're well positioned to fulfill our core responsibilities. Nothing's going to change. We're doubling down on fulfilling our mission to secure the nation's critical infrastructure and strengthen our collective cyber defense. And so, I don't know if that's just um, government speak and trying to reassure everybody things are going to be okay, even if it's not. But in the statement, she does seem confident that the mission won't be impacted and they will continue operations as they have in the past.
Yeah. Brian in chat said that he's gotten some input saying that, vuln scans and stuff have been delayed due to some changes. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that will be the case for a bit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know that like red team staff was cut, not all of them. My understanding is the red team is still functional over there too. But when you're cutting some staff out of all those positions and stuff, it's going to slow down your ability to get to some of that stuff. So either again, like I was saying earlier, do they reduce the scope of the type of organizations they work with, or does it just take longer? Don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I know that they're red team and stuff. It's because one of the things you didn't mention was pen testing, but they do some level of that as
That's
well.
right. Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to get on a call and talk to someone kind of technically about how they handled their pen tests and stuff like that, to the extent, the scope and stuff like that. I was very impressed by it. Like it was very much what you'd expect the standard to be from a lot of
Mm-hmm.
pen testing teams and stuff, which I can't say for all the organizations that I've talked to. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing too that I've kind of been thinking about is when they launched those initiatives specifically for vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. Those services were supposed to be for critical infrastructure only in government and local, state and local government entities, right? Um, but I believe they've kind of opened that up, and they're not really restricting who uses those services anymore. And so I wonder if that's part of refocusing here, saying, hey, we kind of like, had scope creep here and we've overexpanded ourselves and our abilities. And so we're trying to refocus that on what the organization's initial focus and mission was, which is critical infrastructure.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was implying when I said the scope of who they're working with. Like, my understanding was again that infrastructure and government, state and local stuff like that. And I I don't know exactly how they're handling it. I just know that I've heard from a lot of people who don't fit that, as far as I understand,
Yeah.
having taking advantage of those services, which is great. But again, it's going to draw focus to maybe that's not the right move for that organization. I don't know.
Yeah. 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 Pink, any other thoughts from you on that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's kind of like we're saying it's going to be kind of a wait and see thing, but yeah, it's like I said, at least the functions that I'm directly involved in, the CVEs and things like that, still cranking along, at least as far as we know. So yeah, hopefully they're able to maintain a good spot there.
Yeah. Well, good deal. Don't have any questions in the chat yet, but I got a question for you, Pink. You guys have been busy with a lot of casework recently, right? How many open cases is the team working right now?
Yeah, we just opened up the ninth. So that's,
Mhm.
I think, at our peak last year when, last year was insanity. I think we were about 15. And it's been a little slower through the first part of the year here, and then they kind of last few weeks here been a little bit of a wave. So
Yeah. So I'll put you on the spot a little bit, but are there any changes in trends or observations that you'd like to share?
yeah, and I mean, it's always potentially just our view, because we are a smaller organization, but the really interesting one is so like last year when we had those 15 open at once, that was, I would say, 75% of those at least were email compromise cases. So the difference in what we're dealing with right now is that I think maybe one is definitely an email compromise. Maybe two, kind of, we're still investigating to see how that one played out, but the rest are all internal compromise, and or ransomware type cases. So
Hmm.
that's a big weird shift, and maybe it's an anomaly, but definitely out of the norm for what we normally see.
Are there any trends on the internal compromise cases you've observed yet? I know they're all still open and under investigation, but any patterns or specifics that you're seeing repeat between those?
Yeah, the one sort of pattern that I've seen is around Sonic Wall. I think last month we talked a little bit about Sonic Wall vulnerabilities that were out there, and some
Mhm.
newer ones, some older ones. Um, there's some interesting stuff going on there. I'm hesitant to call out too much about it. There's the vulnerabilities that we know about are there. We did see some weirdness with the system after it was fully patched, and so I don't have enough data to say like, hey, was that just something went wrong, or was this still an attacker, or did something get patched incorrectly, right? I mean, that's kind of up to Sonic Wall support to determine, but we have seen those at least targeted, and it's probably not just that it's Sonic Wall, right? That's been a trend for the last little while here, is that attackers are trying to come in through VPNs, right? And so they tend to target those VPN systems because that looks like legitimate traffic a lot of times. It's an easy way to hide. And so I think it's probably more of that than it is like, Sonic Wall themselves having an issue. It just so happens that they had a couple of vulnerabilities recently, that popped up. And I think if this were, Palo Alto or anybody else that had a couple of recent vulnerabilities, I'd probably be saying the same thing. So yeah, we're seeing
Yeah, and
some
I
of that.
wondered I wonder too if it's kind of the classic case we see where possibly, folks are applying the security patches after exploitation has already happened. So they think their device is secured. However, access has already been granted, or a backdoor has already been planted, or, alternate credentials and access paths have already been implanted. And so maybe they're, were unaware they were already exploited.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely where my brain goes to, but this one in particular, supposedly it sort of wipes and starts over. So it's supposed to clear out a lot of those directories where things
Hmm.
could have been written to. So I don't know. I mean, like I'm real, like I said, I'm real hesitant to call anybody out specifically on that just because I don't have any data on it. I can't really speak to it. It could have just been a fluke even,
Hmm.
because it wasn't like we didn't have logs that showed definite attacker activity. There was just a thing happened that shouldn't have.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, beyond that too, though, we're getting a few more of the sort of attacker, vishing type situations, right? You get the call for, hey, this is, Pinky from the help desk. I need to get on your computer for a minute, those types of things. So we've seen a few more of those. So it's kind of interesting to see that stuff pop up as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a talk. I was at Secure 360 in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, and one of the folks in my talk she came up to talk to me afterwards, and she actually works at help desk. And I was talking about essentially attack vectors and focusing on help desk, right, where you're able to get someone's information so you could falsely identify as them in order to, essentially assign a new phone to receive an SMS MFA token. And we've seen that here. It doesn't happen a lot, but we have seen it happen, and attackers have success in those methods. But she says she's seeing that more and more from her perspective in working help desk. Like the attackers have a lot of information on their employees, and they're a large organization, and they're getting better at identifying those methods to reset those tokens and those devices, and really trying to utilize that. So they have to stay pretty prudent and focused to be able to identify and put in extra validation steps to confirm that the user is who they or the caller is who they say they are. So something to be aware of for our listeners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that, it's one of those things where it's like I hate to be like I'm glad to hear that it's happening more. Cause I kind of am because I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad that people might have a renewed focus on it and actually
Yeah.
implementing some new securities and some of that stuff. I mean, I will say that generally with our vishing, we're decently successful. There's a lot of stops, but for, if you're calling 20 different people, 18 of them
Mm-hmm.
stop, you two don't, that's not good still, you know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah,
Like, and so we've seen a lot of success on that too. Oftentimes, where we don't see success is when the companies are smaller or you just happen to choose a bad target. I know there's been a couple times where we'll call to a vishing thing like that. Let's say we'll call on help desk and we're saying we want to add a new MFA device to the account. With our phone broke or we dropped it in the toilet or whatever it might be. Right? It's not working right now. How to replace it? Um, We've had a couple situations where we've done that and said we were someone, and then the person we were talking to, the help desk person was like, "No, I know that person. You're not them." Like very specifically was like, "I'm friends with the
right.
person you're saying you are. You're not them." And so
Yeah,
you run into that more at a smaller organization, right? The bigger organizations, which honestly are the scarier ones to generally be the ones getting attacked. It's harder for that to kick in, and so you really need those processes in place that say you must have these things to move forward.
hmm
And those things need to be, I mean, hopefully impossible for an attacker to have, right? But
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, any other topics? No questions today. This is super light. We can keep it light. Eric, you seen any fun wins on the penetration testing team?
I knew you were going to ask. I'm not down in the dirt with them these days. You know what I mean? So I don't know a
Sure.
lot that's going on. And normally when I hear about things, it's because they're silly, not because they're like fancy. You know what I mean? Um, it's the kind of things that you're still seeing occasional wins from like inconsistent. Like a lot of people these days have MFA in place, right? But inconsistent
Mhm.
MFA, where randomly some accounts don't have it for some reason. Oftentimes, I know we had some wins recently where there was a situation where I think some employees maybe had been let go in the last year or two or something like that, but for whatever
Mhm.
reason, their accounts weren't disabled. And so what it looked like it had done is something along the lines of implementing their MFA after these people had been let go. But those people they didn't work there anymore. Their accounts were disabled though. And so they weren't forced, like basically first login is going to force them to set up that MFA device, right? And maybe change the password
Right.
too, whatever that situation might be. So if we're able to like password spray in or something like that, get access to that, then we're presented to add our own device to that in the very beginning. Obviously, in an engagement, we have certain rules of engagement for that. We're going to contact a client or something like that and be like, "Hey, we're going to do this. I just want to let you know," type
Sure.
of thing. Um, but we've seen some wins in that area. Again, just a silly one, but it's a thing for people to think about. A lot of people have implemented MFA. Have you left any, accounts out for some reason? Maybe it's a service related account that needs to have an email though, or something, or maybe it's whatever, some joint box that you don't want to share an MFA across multiple people using this box, something like that. Well, can that be logged in publicly? And what can you do about that, type of thing? What if someone gets that? Because that's another thing we've seen is these joint email boxes. You'll have like this, like, I don't know, HR at or something like that, right? Or whatever it might be. And again, the MFA is hard to share. So they
Yeah.
don't want to do that. And at the same time, what are the accounts that are going to have the easiest passwords? It's those shared accounts, right? It's not a
Oh, yeah.
personal password. It's not some long passphrase. Oftentimes it's something that is like shared around and it's a little easier to get into. And so you want to be concerned about accounts like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a good point too. And thanks, Steve, for the shout out from Secure 360. It was awesome to meet you, man, and appreciate the kind words. But I was talking about this at that talk too, where looking at our case data from Pinky's team, and I'll go back to like 2 years ago when I first started doing this analysis, and like we had all these BEC cases, and it was simple. Like most of them just didn't have multi-factor in place, right? And even at that time, the multi-factor defeat techniques were a little different than today. But over the last like year and a half, it's 79% of all those BECs actually have, MFA in place in some form or another. And it was a combination, right? So evil jinx, evil proxy, we see those token theft attacks everywhere right now, or misconfigurations in MFA, like you were talking about. But what was really surprising to me is we've seen this really like significant increase in swing in people applying MFA, specifically to like their 365 environment to secure their email. But however, when I look at our assessment data, we've actually trended downward. And the assessment data, our team there is looking for a comprehensive view of MFA, not just your email system. Like, what are all the tools you're using, the applications you're using, and do you have MFA properly applied to all of those, everything in your ecosphere? And that's actually down. Like, it's 55% of organizations are actually fully implementing MFA across all the applications they're using today. And so I think it's kind of the thing we always talk about, like complexity is the enemy. As we continue to add more and more systems and more tools, it's more and more complexity. And so it becomes more difficult for organizations to properly manage and implement that. And then there's even some tools that are still like that don't offer MFA, which blows me away. Some online applications that don't have MFA as an option for their users. And for me, that just, I don't know, it's disheartening to say the least.
Yeah, it is. It is concerning, particularly because of that case data you're talking about, right? We see it all the time. Kind of like Eric mentioned, maybe there's a couple of accounts out there that don't have it applied, or whatever the case may be, and attackers find those things. I mean, it's not just the red team here that's finding those. Those are found by attackers pretty frequently.
Yeah. Brian in the chat asked about thoughts on agentic AI or specific use cases for it. I mean, agentic AI, I mean, which generally means for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, like an AI that is able to have agents that go out and do something. Oftentimes it's going to have some kind of functionality that's programmed in that allows it to take advantage of resources or function calls and stuff like that to go perform tasks and bring that data back. Tons of uses for it, obviously. I mean, like from an attacker's point of view, we're seeing more and more agentic setups for kind of honestly automating some of the hacking or pen testing or things like that, right? Being able to kind of build out some of these frameworks or some of these just general solutions that allow it to perform tasks for you and get that data back instead of actually, when ChatGPT and everything first started kind of becoming the big conversation, a lot of people were using it in a way to say, hey, I'm doing this. What should I do next? What should I do next? What should I do next? And now with agentic, workflows, we have more of the option of saying, hey, go do this, and then it running the Nmap and finding the reports that are coming back and then wanting to do some other things based off of that. And then, yeah, at some point you might need to be involved more, but as those things build out, we're going to see more and more of that. We're going to see, the, a reduction in the skill level required or the understanding required to pull off certain types of attacks. But we see it from the other side too. From the blue side, we see that growing as well, right? And having agents that can be looking into things and actively monitoring certain types of things and responding to certain types of things and or qualifying data before it comes to you and stuff, right? So there's both sides are seeing advances. It's, I guess whoever advances it better at different times, we see the kind of pendulum swing back and forth on that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
from like, an attacker standpoint, it's kind of gold mine, right? So it does make their jobs easier. But like you said, like if we can continue to implement those things in our defense tooling, can also make their jobs easier. And so everything just increases levels together here. But I do think, like, as far as like pen testing, I want to ask you about that specifically. Like, there's a lot of opportunity, right, to start implementing these tools into our pen testing methodologies. But then there's got to be risks associated with that as well, right? So, like, we as humans, like, it's easy to define the boundaries in conversations with our clients and understanding what's in scope, what's out of scope, what can we touch and what can we not touch. And I have to think that there's going to be probably challenges in properly implementing those boundaries if we're using these models. And then even beyond that too, like, we know the idea of like hallucinations or just mistakes that are often made by, these AI engines. And it's possible, even if you're able to introduce those frameworks of limitation, that it can still deviate from that just based upon, what we've seen with previous hallucinations and, just mistakes that these models are sometimes prone to.
yeah, yeah. And so Brian also asked if we're going to see those tools used in defense, and I have seen some indications that there are some folks implementing those types of things. I still think a lot of it is still very rules and sort of playbook defined, right? Like if you see this, then I need to quarantine this. And so I'm curious to see how that gets implemented. In my opinion, there's a fair amount of risk involved in that as well, because if you monitor EDR solutions and things like that, the amount of false positives you get are often pretty high. Or even if it's like not so much a false positive, it's something that maybe looks a little bit bad, adware or something like that, right? But you may not need to take intense action on that just yet. And so hopefully they can find some ways to make sure that it's able to differentiate and things like that. 'Cause I'm just thinking, something like healthcare, right? You have a bunch of systems get quarantined in the middle of something that's a procedure or something like that could be a problem. So I think we'll keep seeing it. I haven't seen anybody really pushing that, I don't think, so far. I mean, there's one company I was thinking of that has sort of these um, they call them like an automated agent. I'm not sure if they're using like LLMs and things in that just yet, but yeah, I'm curious to see what happens. I'm almost certain it'll be a thing though, like very soon.
Yeah, it's an interesting state right now. I mean, LLMs are advancing at a rate, um, a very fast rate, right? And I think it's fun to kind of think about and to see how everything's playing out. There's a lot of people who are wanting to add AI to every product, right? LLMs to every product. They want to add agentic stuff to everything these days, right? But the reality of the situation, from what I've seen, is that a lot of the LLMs are actually quite a bit ahead of what a lot of the uses that we're using for publicly right now, right? A lot of the tooling and stuff that's implementing it is not implementing it to the ability and or taking advantage of the capabilities of the newer LLMs that are popping out every week, right? Um, I am blown away by some of the things that they can do, but I will tell you every single time, despite the fact that I'm blown away by a lot of the stuff, there is corrections, there are some mistakes. I wouldn't even
Sure.
necessarily call a ton of hallucination, though I do still see just straight up hallucinations, but they're getting better about that. But there's just some things that multiple times I'll have to remind the LLM, like, no, that is not the case. And I've told you that's not the case like 5 times now. You know what I mean? And then, typical LLM, I'm sorry, you're right. You have told me that 5 times now. Let me do better. And then it'll make the mistake again. Like sometimes it just gets caught in these things. And so we're not there to the point where it's just going to be able to do everything. But I mean, will we eventually? Maybe, but nonetheless, I do think that I'm excited to see what comes next because, like I said, from I think just messing around with things privately and probably some people's private tooling is far ahead of some of the public stuff that I'm seeing right now, the implementations and the kind of what they're taking advantage of. So
Yeah. Cool. I got another question here from Thomas. What are the current trends in cybersecurity KPIs to be monitoring, and what metrics should one be measuring? When I hear the question, it's a great question, Thomas, but I still always kind of go back to the basics, and it's because we see a lot of companies still aren't able to master those basics. And so for me, like, we'll all talk about this, but I kind of go back to first, like, you can't secure what you don't know exists, right? So let's start with making sure that you have true inventories of all your systems, right? Knowing And when I say an inventory, it's just not a list of systems and their IPs, but understanding the function of those systems, the services that are running on those systems, the data that's stored on those systems, the criticality of the data that's stored on those systems. And when you have that model where you have, a true inventory and all the applications you're utilizing and all those things, right? Then you can really start to assess, like, what are the most important assets in my organization, right? And how do I start to secure those assets, and the assets being systems, applications, data, whatever that is that you're required to keep your business functional. And so I always say, like, let's start with that. And so having a metric that's just like KPI that shows, like, what percentage of our organization do we have properly accounted for right now? Our goal should be 100%, and let's work toward getting to that 100% number, because only then are we going to be able to start reaching into the other aspects of our information security risk reduction profiles, and really making progress there. That's my first one for sure. I don't know, Eric or Pinky, what would you say?
Uh, yeah, I mean, kind of similar. And just I'll tackle it from an incident response perspective of, um, again, some fairly, I want to say basic ones, but if how quickly are you responding and acknowledging alerts? How quickly are you able to triage those and determine if they are, an event, a false positive, or needs to be escalated
Mhm.
to an incident? Then, beyond that, right? Like how quickly are you um able to get from an incident to containment, that kind of thing. But
Mhm.
I will say the one thing that always worries me a little bit about some of those values is that there is some temptation there from folks to just be like, yep, we rebuilt the system, it's contained, right?
Mhm.
Or we eradicated. We got to eradication in 3 hours because we took the system offline and rebuilt it. And so if you're kind of focused on that sort of number there with that, there's a lot of risk of causing yourself to lose forensic artifacts that may be valuable because maybe you caught one system, but you didn't see the one that they actually had their persistence on because it was sneakier, things like that. So I'm always really careful with that kind of stuff. But those would be kind of the basics I would start with at, at a minimum of like how quickly can we respond? How quickly, can
Yeah.
we make that determination, that type of thing.
I really like that too. I actually wrote an article about that, the meantime to respond. You can find it on our blog series. But I think the focus in the past has been like meantime to detect. How quickly can we detect? And detections are useless if you don't have an ability to properly respond to those things. And exactly what you're saying, that second point, Pinky, is like knowing how to respond is super important. And, I came from an enterprise background, and one of my roles there was leading the incident response team. And the things that we saw was just absurd. Now we're talking about an environment here that had over 100,000 internal assets, and we would detect and respond and reach out to the IT team who was managing those assets and say, we've got a detection, we need to get access to this device, get a forensic copy, isolate the machine, all the things so we can start to investigate. And so many times it was like panic, and they would just rebuild the system and like, oh, we rebuilt the system, nothing to worry about. And it's like, no, I have no idea like how this happened, what got here, what they did. I have one alert to look at, but as far as being able to really do a forensic investigation and identify how this happened so we can prevent it, that's all gone. So it's important to know how to properly respond.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add, I mean, as far as the original question is, I don't manage this stuff, and it's been a while since I have been on that side of things. But I mean, for me, I'm just looking at like what are the common ways that people are getting into things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Phishing, things like that, social engineering in general. So looking at those stats, do testing on that, see what that's looking like. Are you making improvements? Is your training working in those areas? And then kind of the same thing that these guys already talked about, but from the vuln management side of like from a vulnerability being discovered to being discovered in your network, right? So like maybe the CVE is created, or the scanners actually create a plugin for it, to the time where you're actually detecting it. What does that time look like? Like and that really comes down to how often are you scanning your devices and determining these things happen, right? But and then also from the point where you discover that you have it, how long until you're able to patch these things? If we're talking about criticals and stuff like that, like what is the overall from like that CV existing out there, maybe a proof of concept out there, to the point where you're patching it? What does that look like? And reducing that time. Because one of the things we're talking about constantly is like, hey, CISA has now put this on their thing. It's a thing from 5 months ago or 6 months ago, or they're warning that this thing is in heavy exploitation. It's a CVE from last year, and it's in heavy exploitation because there's a lot of people who are still taking forever to get to those things. And so reducing that time, I think, is very important. If you're able to, realize that your machines are vulnerable to something and get them patched up to that thing as fast as possible, you're less likely to be one of those statistics in that situation.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
tracking that time, that mean time, both to discovering it in your environment and then to fixing it in your environment, I think are important stats.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And I like to track that's like average age of vulnerabilities, right? And kind of break that down by criticality. What's the average age of your criticals, average age of highs, mediums, and so on. And then make sure you have, goals. Like Eric had mentioned, like for me, like a critical should be a less than a 7-day cycle, right? So once that critical vulnerability is published, you should be able to identify if it exists in your environment and be able to remediate that in an out of band, emergency patch release. Highs, I always recommend you got to be less than 30 days. Mediums, we get into like a little bit of a challenging space for sure, because ideally like a 60-day to 90-day time frame to remediate those is going to be ideal. But we also understand some of those, like, they pose a low risk, and so you really have to understand what the risk is to your organization if it can lead to an exploit, and make that decision for yourself. But I think the primary focus is on reducing the average age and those highs and criticals. And another thing I like to do, besides look at that average age, is look at any that don't meet your defined threshold, right? So how many criticals do I have outside of 7 days? How many highs outside of 30 days? And then really micro focus on those when you're going through your vulnerability management program, and identify what's the holdup that's preventing me from being able to remediate this, and prioritizing that. The remediation task to identify how we can get around the block and be able to remediate those vulnerabilities. Because exactly like Eric said, if you guys can stay at that curve, I mean, unless we have another like proxy logon event, right, where the entire world got compromised in like the course of 2 to 3 days after an exploit was released. In most cases, you're going to be okay. Most cases, not all cases, but most cases. Then I think too, back to your point, Eric, talking about user training and doing phishing tests and vishing tests is super, super important. Because if I'm looking at our case data for the last 2 years, about 50% of our cases are a result of social engineering attacks, right? And so like we're the weakest link. We're always going to be the weakest link. And so developing some KPIs around that, like what's the percentage of your user base that you have tested, and what is your success fail rate around that? And I've always say too, because some organizations, like, they'll start basic using know before or whatever. Like, and there's patterns to these pre-built, phishing exercises where your users are smart and they're going to pick up on those very quickly. But if you get to a point where you're like, hey, we're 99% clean, 99% of my organization doesn't fall victim, only 1% does, like that sounds great. But my question is like, now is it time to mature that exercise, right? And start developing more sophisticated and more targeted attacks, because your users they've mastered the basics. Now let's take them to the intermediate, and then let's try to have the goal of getting everybody to being advanced level defenders and identifying these attacks as they are targeted.
Yeah, I think there's one thing to kind of that note is, oftentimes when you're talking about different KPIs to kind of measure the security and your performance of your team and your implementations, I think that oftentimes people, when there's these things to look at, they want those things to look good.
Mhm.
You kind of almost want them to look bad. I mean, you don't, right? Like at the end of the day, but you want to get the worst picture so that you can fix that picture.
Mhm.
And so that goes to not only just the social engineering, where you want to be changing this up and making it more sophisticated and doing things and bringing in people who might be able to do something that maybe you haven't trained to yet. So you help drives your training to what you need to do. But on all the other fronts too, right? Like don't try to get the best numbers. Like your implementations, your fixes, all that should be trying to get the best numbers. But when you're detecting the numbers, when you're collecting the data, whatever you're doing to do that, try to work against yourself to some extent. When we do phishing and social engineering internally, I tell my people cheat at it. Like specifically, like use information that an attacker probably wouldn't have. Really try to win, man. Like when you're trying to like fish our team and fish our company and stuff like that. Like I want you to pull out every bit of data, cheat as much as you can to try to get people to click on that link,
Oh
because we're
yeah.
going to know what kind of stuff actually passes and people will click on finally. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. I
a
mean,
really
we,
good point. It's a score of, if you're scoring A pluses every time you do that exercise, you're not challenging yourself enough for sure. And we don't want a perfect score, because like we're never going to be perfect. We're all still going to be susceptible, no matter, like even us as professionals, like we're still going to be susceptible to these attacks at some point. You have to be prepared and keep elevating that, because perfection isn't reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all I was going to say is that we, we do similar things with like tabletops, right? So we, maybe we're working through a tabletop and we get to a point where they're like, oh, we have this technology in place to result, stop that from happening, right? That would have stopped the attack there. Generally we're going to say, okay, cool, that's turned off. Something went wrong, it's misconfigured, whatever the case is, because I want to know how can you respond to the incident when it happens, because something is going to go wrong eventually, right? You're gonna, we have MFA on all the things. Oh, but now we realize we don't have it on these three accounts. Okay, those three got compromised. So it's important to get in that uncomfortable spot and then figure out how, what do I need to do to make sure I'm not that uncomfortable again, and when it's a real hair on fire emergency. So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely agree. Don't try to hide from the flaws. Like,
Yeah.
work with them.
It's natural to want to have good numbers, report good numbers, especially when you're reporting them upward. Leave that to you. But I'm just saying when you're testing things, you want to know what it looks like on a bad day too. Um, we do a lot of vuln scanning for clients, right? Oftentimes people want to set that vuln scanning up to be right after their patch cycle, right? Well, okay, that's cool, but like, how long is your patch cycle? Are you if you're not patching very often and you're and you're scanning right after you get done updating everything, you're making an unrealistic view, right? Like, let's say someone sits there and their patch cycle is like they do it every 90 days or something like that. They have this dwell time of maybe criticals hanging out there, but they'll never see that in their results because they only
Yeah.
do their scanning right after that patch cycle, right? And it's that need to like have these really good numbers, great looking numbers. No, like scan randomly. What do you look like then? What do you look like in the middle of it? What, like at any given time? It's okay to see those numbers. I get maybe you don't want to report them, but you need to know them. Your team needs to know them, needs to know like, and let that drive your decisions about how you're going to handle things going forward. And maybe
Yeah.
you need to reduce that patch cycle and stuff like that.
And there's opportunities too when you are presenting the truth. Like Eric's point here, if you're presenting that Vaughn scan data only the day after your patch cycle, that's not the truth. That's not the reality, right? And I get like you want to have these good numbers, like he's saying, to show your leaders that you're running a strong program. But the reality is that's not the truth for really the majority of the entire cycle. You have that 90-day cycle, and the attackers don't care about when your patch window is. And so then we have to shift our thinking, like, why are you only able to patch on a 90-day cycle, right? What support do you need to be able to increase that frequency? And so then it becomes really important to tell that story, like maybe then the bone scan in the middle of that cycle, so you can get a good example of what it really looks like from an attacker's perspective, and then you can identify why you can't patch on a reduced cycle. Because if you're at 90 days, right, and we scan in the middle of that, if you could get to a 30-day window, well, that score is going to improve a lot. And we're still scanning in the middle, say day 15 instead of day 45, right? You show improvement there. And so identifying like what's the roadblock, what's the story, what support do I need to be able to increase that frequency? And then if you go to your leaders and you share that statistic, and maybe it is poor, it's not where you want it to be, it's not an ideal state. That's okay if you can tell the story of why, and you can give the roadmap of where you need to go to get there to be able to implement a better patching frequency or a better cycle. And I think that's just, one specific focus point, but it can apply across the board for all your KPIs.
Yeah, I find that taking an honest look at things and then having honest conversations with the people that need to have them can oftentimes it is the best solution, right? It can be a little uncomfortable at times, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it's how you affect actual change and getting the resources you need and getting the eyes on the things you need to actually make it better in the end. So,
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just thinking too, I was going back talking about the like inventory and how to build a proper inventory system. Another big thing that is super important right now is really the application inventory. And I'm not just talking about like the applications that you're utilizing for business function or you're serving to your clients, but the applications that you're permitting for use internally on your own systems as well. And developing some sort of metric to understand like, have we accurately identified and approved all software that's in place for our own internal systems? And do we have a process in place to identify when users are installing or administrators are installing new software that may be outside of that scope, and having an approval process to then review that, give it approval or not? is really important. And even like going back to controlling user devices as well, and making sure users don't have the ability to install non-approved software on their devices is important. And then we get into that tricky space of like mobile too. It's really difficult to be able to have a true MDM if you don't own the device, right? We see a lot of BYOD for mobile specifically today. And I only bring that up to going back to like, the casework that Pinky's team is doing, like with all the evil jinx stuff and the evil proxy stuff that's going on right now. Pinky, and how many of those cases do you see where like perfect data is being installed as an exfiltration technique, where that's an application, they're connecting to your tenant. And if you have a process in place that no applications can connect to your tenant without approval, you stop that. But most people don't have that in place. And so the attackers are able to install this third-party software and essentially offload mailbox data even after you're able to remediate that incident.
Yeah, I mean, last year we saw it constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, and I will say, I think perfect data itself has kind of dropped off a little bit because everybody knows about it now, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But there's going to be another one. There'll be something else, right? That'll start popping up, and yeah, having those policies in place to just keep that from happening anyway is the way to go. It's one less thing you have to worry about, one less thing you have to investigate and dig into.
Yep. Cool. Any other questions from the crowd today? If not, then we're going to start wrapping up and head to the weekend.
I like weekends.
You guys got fun
Weekends are
plans
good.
for the weekend?
No,
I got a rally tomorrow and then a
Oh,
bunch of yard
nice.
work.
Nice.
very cool.
Oh, got a concert tonight.
Who are you seeing?
Primus.
Awesome.
Oh,
Heck yeah. That'll be fun, man. Les Claypool, one of the best bass players of all time.
Yep.
yeah, I heard.
I'm volunteering at Kids Fishing Day tomorrow, so who knows how that's going to go, but I'm going to teach some kids to tie some woolly boogers. So that should be fun. And then I'm selling a boat on Sunday. I got to drive like 3 hours to meet a guy who's buying my boat.
Oh, yeah, that's it's gonna be fun. Is this the boat that I know about? The one you got? Did you haul that one out there?
Oh,
The
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all right, yep, yep.
I'm still keeping my drift boat, just so everybody knows.
Oh,
It's my
okay,
my old drift boat. Yeah, I'm selling that one.
gotcha.
Cool.
Yeah, Josh, that's the same concert I'm going to. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it tonight.
Well, heck yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us. Eric, Pink, thank you all for
Yeah,
all your contributions. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next month.
all right. Thanks, everybody.